everybody. This is Dr. Leslie. Welcome to the Healing Migraines Naturally podcast. I am Dr. Leslie Cisar, and I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor. And I work with women all over the country who have chronic migraines and want to heal them naturally. They want to actually restore their health so their body doesn't generate migraines in the first place, so that they can get off their migraine medication and the fistfuls of supplements that they're taking, trying to abate the migraines. Today I want to talk about histamines and migraines. So this is a really hot topic right now, I would say within the natural medicine space, as well as within conventional medicine. Conventional medicine is getting more and more aware or concerned about histamine as well. Amongst the migraine suffering community, histamine is talked about a lot, but the general public, when they hear histamine, right, most people think histamine, they think allergies, right? So it's the histamine that is making my nose run and making my eyes water and making me sneeze when I have those allergies in the springtime, right? And so I'm going to take an antihistamine, maybe like a Benadryl or an Allegra, to shut down that histamine so that I'm not blowing my nose and I'm not sneezing and my eyes aren't watering and burning and so on with those allergies. But within the migraine community, a lot of people have been told, a lot of migraine sufferers have been told to avoid histamine containing foods because there's a belief that excess histamine within the body, either that the body is producing or that is in the food that we eat, is generating the migraines or is a migraine trigger, right? So I want to talk about this not only as it relates to migraines, but there's sort of a new diagnosis called mast cell activation syndrome, MCAS, that is gaining prominence, I would say, within the past 5 years within the natural medicine industry, whether it's amongst naturopathic doctors, functional medicine practitioners, chiropractors, sort of this big umbrella of natural medicine practitioners that I am under. This mast cell activation syndrome diagnosis or concept has really become prominent, I would say, within about the past 5 years or so. So this word histamine or this topic of histamine, it's on a lot of people's minds right now. And a lot of migraine sufferers have gone to great lengths, great sacrifice, great denial, self-denial, to avoid histamine-containing foods. And if you've listened to other podcast episodes, you and I don't need to eat a certain way because we're prone to migraine. So if you don't know anything about me, I used to have chronic migraines myself. That's why I became a naturopathic doctor, due to my own healing and recovery from chronic migraines. So I am prone to migraines if I am not in a state of health. And so if you're like me, if you are prone to migraines, you might have been told to avoid histamine-containing foods, or sometimes people are even prescribed antihistamine medications for their migraines as a migraine preventative, or people might take antihistamines, like a lot of migraine sufferers, they'll like pop a Benadryl or something like that if they have a migraine. So let's talk about histamine a little bit here, and we'll get into how it relates to migraines. So histamine, you might call it like a cellular signaler. So there are, untold compounds that our cells make to signal to other cells and to make things happen within the body. So histamine, you might call it like a chemical messenger, chemical signaler. It's that type of molecule. So histamine is used in general. Histamine is used when the body wants to generate some inflammation. So inflammation, this is another word that is kind of like a dirty word, right? Everything, we're trying to lower inflammation, anti-inflammatory foods and supplements and drugs and everything. But inflammation is required for healing. And this is a very important point that people are missing particularly in the natural medicine industry, a lot of practitioners are sort of missing this piece. So healing is not going to take place unless there's inflammation. So the most sort of visible example of inflammation for us is if we cut our finger, we're chopping a vegetable and we cut our finger with the knife. So histamine is actually required in blood clotting. Okay, so when that cut is made, histamine comes into play to assist with the clotting that's necessary to stop the bleeding. So that doesn't seem like a bad molecule. That seems pretty necessary, right? And then we will notice, right, over the next few days that where that cut is, there's inflammation around the cut, right? That little red ring around the cut on our finger, that's inflammation. So in order for the skin to heal and repair itself from that cut, there has to be inflammation within the skin for that repair to take place. So histamine is a molecule that is used to generate necessary inflammation for something else to happen that the body considers to be necessary. For healing to take place, I'm not saying that every type of healing action requires histamine, but histamine is a chemical signaler that generates inflammation. So with allergies, right, so kind of the classic thing that we think about with histamine is the allergy response. So any type of allergy is actually an indication that we are struggling with an overload of metabolic waste materials and toxins. So when we breathe in, like say in the springtime, you breathe in that pollen, you breathe in those little fresh new grass molecules, and then you start sneezing, your nose starts running, your eye starts watering, right? When we go into the spring and our body is already overloaded with metabolic waste materials and toxins, then we're going to experience those springtime allergies. Because I want you to think of this as sort of like we have like this little toxin bucket, this little trash can, okay? So we've got our little trash can, and we are continuously adding to that bucket with our own metabolic waste material. So anything that your cells do in your body, they generate waste material, okay? Trash. We got to get the trash out of the cells and into the waste bucket, okay? We can't have that trash. You don't want a bunch of trash inside your cells. They're not going to work well. Hi there, it's Dr. Leslie. If you're a woman having 8 or more migraine days a month, let's talk. I'll show you how to drop them to near zero in 90 days without adding more medication. In fact, you can even lower or maybe even completely wean off of your medication within 90 days and without agonizing cold turkey withdrawals. Let me tell you about my client Judy. She was on such strong medications for her migraines that she was nearly bedridden and could barely function. She had to close the doors of her small business and felt like a failure. She wondered every day, why am I doomed to suffer from these migraines? But just like you, she started listening to my Healing Migraines Naturally podcast, and a spark ignited. She knew that if she could just figure out why these migraines started in the first place, she could restore and recover her health again. So she booked her free consult call with me, and the rest is history. She now goes months between migraines and runs her small business full-time again because she's completely off of those preventative medications. She followed the 12-week plan and got incredible results. I've worked with women just like Judy from all over the United States overcome migraines naturally. So if you're serious about healing your migraines, then tap the link in the description and book a free consult call with me, just like Judy did. We do cap new clients monthly, so if the calendar's full, the doors are closed for now, so don't wait to reclaim the life you deserve to live. No matter how hopeless things seem now, with expert guidance, you can heal and recover from migraines. So I look forward to chatting with you. Click the link now to schedule your call. We got to get the trash out of the cells, and we're going to put that trash in our little waste bucket. Okay? Then we're exposed to toxins in the environment. Okay? The food supply, the air supply, the water supply contain external toxic substances. Many of them are man-made, but there are also naturally occurring toxins in the environment that have been here since the dawn of time. We're going to get exposed to those. We can do some things to lower our exposure to those environmental toxins, but honestly, there's only so much you can do, okay? So like, for example, mold in the environment. Mold is all over the place, okay? On the top of my desk here that I'm talking to you on, I can't even imagine how many naturally occurring little mold spores are here, right? So we are surrounded by naturally occurring environmental toxins. We humans have made a lot of toxic substances, okay? Like I say, you can try to avoid them, but you're never going to be able to avoid all of them. They're going to go into your bucket, okay? So we want to drain the bucket. The bucket is never going to be empty, but we just want to keep it draining. We want to have a hole in the bottom of the bucket. We want to have a drain in the bottom of the bucket that can keep up, okay? So if we're adding 10 things a minute to the bucket, we want a drain at the bottom of the bucket that can drain out 10 things a minute, okay? We don't want that bucket to overflow, okay? It's never really going to be empty because we're adding stuff to it all the time. It's sort of like your bathtub. You turn the water faucet on in your bathtub, like there's always a little water near the drain, right? But if the drain is clogged, eventually that tub is going to totally overflow. But when you turn that faucet on, you just want the drain, right, where I'm draining the water. There's always going to be a little bit of water in the tub, but I'm draining the water as the water is coming into the tub. That's what we want with this little toxin bucket. So when it comes around the springtime and all the flowers are blooming and the pollen is in the air and the little grass molecules and everything, those are environmental toxins. Okay? And so we breathe in a little grass molecule. Our body has to detoxify that, has to process that. Our lungs are actually an organ of detoxification. So you can think of that little grass molecule going into the bucket. Okay? Well, what if we haven't been draining the bucket? What if the bucket is all the way up to the top and then May comes around and we're putting in all this pollen and grass and everything else? Now the bucket is going to overflow. The body wants to protect us. So our body says, okay, I was barely hanging on. This bucket was pretty near the top before the flowers bloomed. But now that the flowers are blooming, now I really have an overload. My organs of detoxification, that's the drain at the bottom of the bucket, okay? Our liver and our lungs and our kidneys, those are the 3 organs of detoxification. That's what makes up the drain at the bottom of the bucket. So our body says, well, okay, I can't keep that drain open wide enough. I can't keep that bucket drained. I got to get this pollen out of here, right? So how could I do that? Well, I could generate a discharge. I could flush it out of here, right? If I can generate tears and mucus, I can capture that stuff, then it won't go in my bucket that's already overloaded. I can just flush it out. I can just flush the problem out and not even bring it into the body, and then I won't add to this overflowing bucket. So to do that, I need to have histamine. So in this case, the histamine, we don't like the allergies, right? We don't like to have our eyes burning and watering, and we don't like to be have this runny nose all the time. But the body uses histamine to activate the immune system to generate that discharge so that we can flush that material out and not add it to an overflowing bucket. Histamine, the boogeyman, or is it actually assisting something? Okay, so histamine is used by the immune system to activate the immune system. So again, if I am exposed to a virus and the virus comes in and starts multiplying, I want my immune system to get on that, right? And so I'm going to have some histamine to help generate that immune response. So I want a robust immune system. I don't want an immune system that doesn't have enough histamine to activate quickly. Histamine is also used by your stomach. It's a chemical signaler or a signaling molecule that is necessary for your stomach to make stomach acid. So, that sounds pretty critical, right? We need to have adequate stomach acid to digest our food, break our food down. The minerals that are in our food in particular, you have to have a low pH in your stomach for best absorption of minerals. Well, every cell in the body needs minerals. Our bones in particular need minerals, right? So this is very critical that we're able to generate adequate stomach acid for proper digestion and getting the nutrients out of our food so that we can get them into our body and to the cells. Histamine also has some action within the brain and neurotransmitter production. And I'm sure, this is just a high-level overview of some of the things that histamine does. I'm sure that there are discoveries yet to be made as far as what histamine is doing as far as a chemical signaler, or what positive things histamine is doing within the body. We've talked about what histamine does and how it's a positive within the body, but let's talk about where it's kind of gotten this bad rap. When there is an excess of histamine production, then we can have some symptoms that will cause us a lot of suffering. So something that people can develop is chronic hives. So hives, right, these are those really itchy red welts that will form in the skin, and those are formed because histamine is being released within the skin. And so people can develop chronic hives if they have excess histamine releasing within the skin. This syndrome called mast cell activation syndrome, this is a sort of a new diagnosis to describe a cluster of symptoms that are related to histamine being released within the body. So it could be something like chronic hives, people could feel very flushed, people can have an elevated heart rate, people can have changes in their mood or neurological symptoms. So a wide variety of symptoms can fall under this umbrella. So again, the concept with this is, well, somehow the histamine got there. How do we get rid of it? But when we look at the actual function of histamine within the body, well, histamine is going to be released when the body is trying to heal something and or when there's a toxin overload within the body. So these histamine-related symptoms, whether they be seasonal allergies, chronic hives, the cluster of symptoms under the umbrella of mast cell activation syndrome, it's an indication that, number one, there's a large toxin overload within the body, that bucket is overflowing. Okay, and so your body is trying to protect you, and it's trying to rally anything it can to try to get those toxins out of the body. And histamine is one of those chemical signalers that the body uses when there's an overload of metabolic waste material and toxins, when that bucket is overflowing. So also, if there is a lot of healing that the body is trying to generate, histamine is going to be required to facilitate that healing process, to facilitate, I should say, the generation of inflammation. Because remember, nothing heals in the body without inflammation. So when people have an overload of metabolic waste materials and toxins, when that bucket is overflowing with those toxin molecules, the toxin molecules actually damage things within the body. They're toxic, okay? So as they're circulating in the bloodstream, they're kind of bumping into other cells and damaging those cells. This is why we have to get them out of the body. And so you can imagine if my bucket was overflowing and I have a lot of circulating waste materials and toxin molecules that are bumping into my cells and damaging, making little tiny micro cuts, my body's going to have to do a lot of healing. And so it's going to need to generate a lot of histamine to facilitate the inflammation required to do all of that healing. So, is it the histamine that's the problem, or is the histamine actually being generated to try to solve or mitigate a deeper underlying problem? So whenever I have a new client that says, I have a lot of allergies, I have hives, I have been diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome, right away I know that their little trash can, their little toxin bucket, it's overflowing. And so the histamine is really not the problem per se. It's we got to get that bucket drained. The drain is too small because our organs of detoxification don't have what they need to work at full capacity and open up that drain fully and get that bucket drained. Okay. So a lot of people, they're being put on antihistamines and so on. Well, now I'm preventing my body from making the histamine that it wants to make to try to generate necessary inflammation for healing. That can impact our ability to make our stomach acid, can upset our neurotransmitter balance, right? These things, right? That our body is a very, very complex system. It's not just sort of like, A plus B equals C, right? It's not like simple math. It's like the most complex calculus anyone could imagine. And so when we come in and we try to sort of play God with our biochemistry, there are going to be other downstream effects that we can't even anticipate. And we call those side effects, okay? So the answer to the problem really is getting that bucket drained. And our organs of detoxification can drain that bucket, but the organs of detoxification have to have the nutrients that they need to function optimally, and the cells of those organs have to have adequate cellular voltage. And so if you've been listening to the podcast a lot, I talk about the 3 things that we need to do to restore our health and maintain our health. I call these things the 3 principles. So the first principle is we have to get the nutrients that our cells need to our cells. The third principle is we have to restore our resiliency and vitality, and that means cellular voltage, if we're talking about that third principle at the cellular level. The second principle is we have to clear metabolic waste materials and toxins. That's draining the bucket. But we get backed up in that second principle because we have a deficiency or a blocker that's preventing the first principle and the third principle from getting to those organs of detoxification. So we have to identify, okay, how do we get into this spot in the first place? What do we need to do to correct it? And then your organs of detoxification are going to do what they're designed to do, which is open that drain up higher and get that bucket drained. And then the body doesn't need to generate the histamine. Okay, so that's a high-level overview of what's going on with histamine. Let's bring it to migraine specifically. So histamine, it's a chemical signaler that we make, but it's also a naturally occurring compound. Other living things use histamine, okay? So the food that we eat will contain naturally occurring histamine. So our digestive tract has enzymes to break down histamine. Our digestive tract will also make histamine, okay? Like, do you see how complicated this is? And that histamine is not like this bad thing. It's a highly useful, necessary molecule within the body. But the body has what it needs. When the body is functioning optimally, it's going to keep things regulated, okay? So our digestive tract, when our digestive tract is functioning properly, it's going to produce an enzyme called DAO that sort of breaks that histamine apart that's in the food. Or if we've made a little bit too much in our digestive tract, it kind of comes in and cleans things up. Okay, so again, our body isn't stupid, right? I mean, this is like there's regulatory mechanisms in place to account for things, like if we're eating histamine, right? Our body is, when it's functioning well, it's going to keep that well regulated. But if our digestive tract is not functioning optimally and it's not regulating that histamine level within the digestive tract, you can have the histamine kind of come into the bloodstream from the digestive tract, particularly if you have something that's called leaky gut, which is basically when your digestive tract, when the cells of your digestive tract, they've gotten kind of weak and they're not butting up together tightly and forming a tight barrier, and they're kind of like, and then there's a little gap there, then things are going to kind of come into your bloodstream without proper regulation. I've done several podcasts on this. We'll link to those in the description. So if we don't have tight junctions in our digestive tract, if we're unable to properly neutralize or break down the histamine that's either in the food or that our digestive tract has produced, we're going to have an influx of histamine coming into our bloodstream. And then we're going to experience those effects. And if you're prone to migraines, yeah, you could get a migraine. What's happening is once that histamine hits your bloodstream, that is going to travel to your liver, and then your liver is going to break that histamine down. But I want to go back to that bucket. If your bucket is already overflowing, and then you have a big influx of histamine from your digestive tract coming into your bloodstream, and then hitting your liver, you're going to overwhelm an already overwhelmed liver. And that bucket is going to overflow. And if you're prone to migraines, that's a great way to get a migraine. So, but if you have a trash bucket that's drained and it's not just overflowing and like one little drop is going to make it overflow, but it's like 3/4 empty, you can have a big influx of histamine come into your body from your digestive tract, from your food, and your liver is going to be able to handle it. You're going to put it in that bucket. The bucket isn't going to overflow, and your liver is going to process that. But if the bucket overflows and you're prone to migraines, you're highly, highly likely to get a migraine. So we have sort of villainized foods that contain histamine. If you Google, histamine and migraines, you're going to get a list of foods that you're not supposed to eat if you're prone to migraines because they have histamine in them. But I'm only going to be affected by that if my bucket is like at capacity. So we want to get that bucket drained so that we've got room for an influx of histamine molecules or other toxin molecules from the environment. We want a bucket that can accommodate that, and then we're going to feel good. We're not going to get a migraine. And this explains why people will try to avoid histamine, trying to avoid getting a migraine. And so they'll say, okay, I'm not going to have this food. I'm going to avoid these histamine-containing foods. But then, oh gosh, they're in a restaurant, they're at somebody's house, they're at a party. Well, I kind of want to eat that food. And I know it has histamine in it, but I'm just going to give it a shot. And sometimes they don't get a migraine. Sometimes they get a horrible migraine, right? Well, that's because our bucket, right? The one time you ate that histamine-containing food and you didn't get a migraine, your bucket was a little bit drained, right? You had a little capacity in that bucket to take that extra histamine on without getting a migraine. But another time you eat that histamine food and then your bucket is already overflowing, like it's right up at the top, and then you add more to it, boom, now it's overflowing. And now you've got that migraine. The other issue with histamine in the food is that if there's naturally occurring histamine in the food, it sort of increases over time. So a lot of migraine sufferers are told to avoid eating leftovers because if they're kind of in your fridge and you eat it 3 days later and that histamine has been kind of accumulating within the food for 3 days in your fridge and your bucket is overflowing, right? Again, if you have room in your bucket, you can eat the 3-day-old leftovers in your fridge. But if your bucket is all the way at the top and then you have that extra histamine and your liver can't deal with it, then you're highly likely to get a migraine. So this is why a lot of migraine sufferers are more prone to getting migraines if they eat restaurant food, because restaurants are not sort of lovingly preparing the food right when you order it, right? Most restaurants are preparing big batches of food ahead of time. They're preparing, 10 gallons of a sauce on Monday that they use throughout the week in various dishes, right? It's not like you order something and they're making that sauce from scratch right when you order it. Restaurants are preparing big quantities of food ahead of time, and then they are sort of like leftovers, right? So you could be ordering something on a Friday night and they're using the sauce that they made on Monday, and then all those days the histamine has been accumulating in the food. And then you eat it and then you get a migraine and you blame the food in the restaurant, right? Or you blame the histamine in the food. But where's your bucket? If your bucket has the room to accommodate the histamine, whether it's a little bit of histamine in the food on Monday, or if it's the larger amount of histamine that built up by Friday, if your bucket has room to accommodate it, you won't feel sick, you won't get the migraine. So the ultimate goal is to get that bucket drained. Okay? And to get that bucket drained, you have to give your organs of detoxification what they need within the first principle and the third principle. So when I work with my clients, this is one of the assessments that we do. Where do they stand within the first principle, within the third principle, and ultimately within the second principle? And once we know where you stand, then we can put that game plan together to address those blockers or those missing pieces. What's the best way for you to give your body what it needs so that everything starts working optimally again, and then you start feeling better and better. And then as a result, your body is not being put in a position where it has to make all of this additional histamine. So if I don't have an overload of toxin molecules that are circulating around and damaging things and requiring all of this extra inflammation for healing, then I don't need to produce so much histamine. If I have a bucket that's not all the way up to the top, when May comes around and the flowers start blooming and the grass starts growing, then I can inhale all of those pollen molecules and not have any allergies. So I used to have horrible allergies, okay? And my father has always had bad allergies. So when I started getting allergies when I was in my early teens, everybody said, well, what do you expect? Your father has allergies. It's genetic, okay? By the time I was in high school, I was giving myself shots in my leg once a month, okay? I used to have horrific springtime allergies, so bad that I would get spontaneous nosebleeds at school when I was in high school. I would just be sitting in English class and all of a sudden my nose would start gushing blood because it was so inflamed and the capillaries would just burst. And that would happen every spring until I finally got help for my migraines. And the chiropractor, the local chiropractor that I worked with who helped me restore my health, we got that bucket drained. And what do you know? The next spring, I didn't have any allergies. And when I'm working with my clients who have seasonal allergies, this is something that we track. Most people have seasonal allergies in the spring. So if I start working with them in the fall, well, we got 6 to 9 months. We can get that bucket drained. And then what do you know? This spring, I didn't have any problems. What do you know? So it's, again, the histamine is being produced to help flush this material out, because if we bring it into the body, we can't handle it. Our bucket is already full, and then we're going to have even more problems. So again, we're always trying to find, what's the one thing that's causing the problem? And then we kind of latch on. It's the histamine. It's this, it's that. It's never just one thing, right? The one thing that we're pointing our finger at, the histamine is used all over the body for a wide variety of functions. It's not a boogeyman. It's a necessary chemical signaling molecule that if we didn't have, we wouldn't be able to have an immune response. We wouldn't have adequate stomach acid for our digestion. We wouldn't have proper neurotransmitter production, right? we have to stop thinking about our body as somehow being like broken or defective when we don't feel well, right? We have to start thinking about, okay, what are the root causes? What are the missing pieces or the deficiencies? What doesn't my body have that it needs to function optimally and keep things well regulated? So if you've been avoiding histamine containing foods for your migraines, what I would recommend is that you don't just go on a big binge and eat a whole bunch of histamine containing foods. Okay. So if you're sensitive to histamine in foods, if you're having other symptoms of high histamine within the body, if you have a mast cell activation syndrome diagnosis, right, you don't want to overload your body with additional histamine from the food that you're eating until you repair your digestive function so that when you eat food that contains histamine, you have that necessary enzyme in proper amounts to neutralize the histamine that's in the food that you're eating. Okay. So I don't want you to take away from this podcast that like histamine is fake, or I should be able to eat all the histamine I want without any problems. That's not what I'm saying. So if you've been avoiding histamine containing foods, if you know that histamine is a so-called migraine trigger for you, this is where you want to reach out so that we can do this detailed assessment with you, and then I can guide you and recommend, okay, what do you need to do to bring things back into balance, give your body what it needs to function properly so that you can tolerate the histamine in your food. And so when I have clients like this that have been avoiding histamine containing foods, we continue that avoidance until we see the signs that your digestion is improving and that bucket is draining. Okay, when your digestion is improving and that bucket is draining, we will know based on the symptoms, based on the signals, based on how you feel, that's going to be obvious. And then we start reintroducing those histamine containing foods in a controlled way so that we're not just, overwhelming a body that is still in the healing process. So like I say, I don't want you to listen to this and then just eat a whole bunch of leftovers if you've been avoiding leftovers. Okay, we want to heal and recover, and then we want to carefully reintroduce those foods. And when we do this time after time after time, I have clients that have been on the most restrictive diets, whether it's, a low histamine diet or any of these other, elimination type diets, restrictive diets. We get the digestion working well. We get that bucket drained, that toxin bucket drained, and we increase vitality, cellular voltage, and the general resiliency and vitality within the body. And then we reintroduce the foods and people do just fine. And then you can go on vacation and you can eat the food at the resort. You can go meet your friends for dinner and you can order off the menu. You can have a special treat food on your birthday, or it's not fun to be on these restrictive diets. And I'm telling you, it's not necessary. When your body has what it needs within these three principles, you can eat food. Okay, you can eat real food. We should be able to eat food. Okay, so, and we can even have some occasional treats. Okay, because life isn't worth living if we can't have a few treat foods every now and then, right? So very good. So I hope this helps. Again, let me know in the comments if this is something that you've been either diagnosed with, or you've been struggling with, or you've been confused about with your migraine management. So very good. I will talk to you guys soon. Have a great day.